Hey, what's up guys, Sir Amanon here, bringing to you a different style of video than what I normally do on the channel. Today for you guys, I'm going to be discussing my articulated thoughts and analysis on yesterday's July 2019 TCG Forbidden and Limited List update. So without further ado, let's just dive on in. As a preview for what's to come in the video, I'm going to quickly go over the actual changes to the list, how they've impacted the meta decks, talk about generic format relevant cards, discuss the rogue decks, and lastly, a very rough draft of what I feel the strongest decks are going to be moving forward in this upcoming format. Alright, so as a refresher, I'm just going to place the cards on the screen as a visual, but I'd like to divulge a bit more about this type of video. You've probably already noticed that this video is markedly scripted in comparison to many discussion videos on my channel. And the reason for that is I want to convey my thoughts concisely, yet still with the same thought process that is customary on the channel, rather than just provide my initial inclinations and unscripted predictions. Additionally, from a visual perspective, this video is also formatted much differently, and I'm hoping that these changes will overall add together more to the experience. I'll continue to experiment and try and find a format that works best with my style of delivery and analysis, so please do feel free to give me your guys' feedback in the comment section down below. I'd very much appreciate it. Alright, so now let's get into the bulk of the discussion. The first deck I want to talk about is the Thunder Guard Dragon combo deck, as it's the deck that I like to discuss the most. The first topic to unpack is why isn't Guard Dragon LB banned? And I think one of the biggest reasons is that the Rocket Structure deck is going to be released next month, and the Guard Dragons will continue to supplement any dragon-based deck, giving it immediate firepower and a good selling point. In its place, we have the somewhat oddly positioned Eclipse Wyvern, which serves to lower the ceiling of modern Guard Dragon iterations by limiting access to cards like Levianeer, as well as its recyclability with the Chaos Dragon prize card and Guard Dragon Pisty. Eclipse Wyvern's ban also goes hand in hand with Tempest's Limit, which is another way to refuel Eclipse Wyvern, especially when we're now confirmed to be getting Dragoonity Knight Romulus in Rising Rampage in August. This import, alongside Tempest, would have allowed Guard Dragon decks to add Eclipse Wyvern off the prize card, search Dragon Ravine off Romulus, and then pitch the Eclipse Wyvern off Ravine to dump Tempest, triggering Wyvern and then banishing it for a Tempest summon to get even more extenders. Banning Eclipse Wyvern is a very indirect hit to LP by simply reducing its capacity for it to be repeatedly abused. Speaking of indirect hits to the Guard Dragon package, we have the Baby Dragons being limited, which lowers consistent access to LP, and the ability to continuously generate advantage, since the second dragon that you summon can no longer search for another copy of the first. With these cards going to one apiece, players will now have to restructure the way in which the Chaos Engine synergizes with the Thunder cards, seeing as Batteryman Solar and Wyvern Burster was one of the most potent 2-card combos the deck had. However, because Collapse Servant is still searchable via Brotar and LP, there is reasonable access to these cards if needed, or one can simply fall back on Levianeer. The question then simply becomes, how do we access LP? With Crusadia's Ib the World Chalice Justisher, and generic dragon support like Destrudo and Defrag Dragon, there are still definitely workarounds to enabling LP and fully combo off. Granted, it still is the same choke point it's always been, and arguably even more salient because of these hits. The last point to touch on is the Danger package, which does lower consistency and the ability to summon free bodies, but one can simply replace the lost dangers with either worse names like Mothman and Chupacabra, or one can elect to run a higher Crusadia account instead. Therefore, the deck is by no means dead or out of the picture, and innovative players will certainly find new ways to end in effectively the same boards, since none of the boss monsters really got hit. I expect this strategy to be top tier moving forward, especially for those who are unprepared for it. Next up is Salamangreat. I don't think there's a whole lot to say here. Many people had a premonition of Gazelle or possibly Circle being hit, but likely not both together. That being said, the deck is now very much more reliant on Signet Mining, which is a super vulnerable card that you're only opening 33% of the time anyway. While it's possible to counteract those consistency hits by falling back on more hand traps, generic defensive cards like Crackdown, or level 3 extenders like Backup Secretary and Crusadia Reclusia in order to summon Mirage Stalio easier, the fundamental fact of the matter is, it's going to be far more difficult for the deck to get its plays started. Salamangreat still does its thing, and its grind game is still extremely potent, but it achieves its win condition far less often, making it a hard sell to fight through a YCS or even a larger regional. Now I want to talk about Orcust. There is two pillars to this deck, as a standalone strategy or as a splashable engine. For the former, it still has access to several one-card engines sans Light Stage, and can continue to utilize cards like Glongirsu with Babel. However, the power level of this deck is neutered quite drastically, and it is in need of other ways to supplement the Orcust's repeatability. The deck might defer back to its previous style of going second, breaking boards, and setting up OTKs, or it could alternatively find ways to abuse niche interactions like Winda and Dingirsu. As an engine, I think it is harder to justify including it in many decks, even the ones that can accommodate it natively, simply because the payoff might not be large enough to warrant the possible interference with the main strategy. There would have to be more reasons than grabbing a Crescendo, disrupting with Babel and Dingirsu, or grinding with a smaller Orcust package in order to reasonably incorporate the engine. Lastly, for the top tiers of last format is Sky Striker. At first glance, many people would deduce that the grind game is very much weakened without numerous ways to recycle resources, and that Ghost Ogre and generic back row removal is far more effective. I would agree that that's true. However, if the deck is still able to perform well enough, perhaps by going second or even taking on a different strategy altogether, Striker can still very much drown its opponent in card advantage with Widow Anchor and Engage still at 3, and it has historically lived through many formats, proving its adaptability. It might even slip under the radar once more, only for it to rear its head again and take another YCS win. Remember, when Kagari got limited, many people initially flocked over to cards like Magnet Reverse, but the deck itself with its core engine still proved to be self-sufficient with the correct resource management. This hit alongside Kagari could certainly be more severe, but I highly doubt that it's a nail in the coffin as far as top tier level of play is concerned. Alright, so now let's discuss some of the meta-relevant non-engine generic cards. I think many of these are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm just going to quickly go over them. Terraforming and Metaverse getting limited are both indicative of Mystic Mind's strength and positioning in the format, not as a pure burn strategy, but as a component of Striker and Orcust. The Field Spot engine doesn't really exist in the way that it used to anymore, so decks will now need to use that one terraforming to grab the actual engine card that they need the majority of the time. Also, Mystic Mind Burn is now pretty much done and dusted, since its tutors in Trapchick and Lilith are extremely weakened. Super Poly will continue to break boards, especially against up-and-coming combo decks like Pendulum, and can be a very real side deck threat due to how consistently it can pop up at 3. Finally, Solemn Judgment is a boost to trap decks that struggle versus evenly matched Twin Twisters, Red Reboot, and Denko Sekka, which is pretty refreshing to see. This list also impacted many of the rogue decks of the previous format, which could move up, down, or stay the same in power level. The first big loser of the format is Altergeist, which was arguably the next best positioned deck after the big four. However, the deck already was struggling to make a stand at the highest tiers of play, mainly because the deck struggled with consistency as what is with Multi-Faker at 3. Sangan into Almirage is very cloggy in terms of normal summons, and without 3 Metaverse, falling back on Mystic Mind simply isn't as potent. Geist will really struggle to move forward, though it's not impossible as we've seen in the OCG. It can still have some success. Trickstar is basically all about its consistency, and with losing 3 copies of Light Stage, it also loses 3 ways into Candina, which cripples the deck's consistency very much. And I have the math on screen as far as how often you are likely to open Candina as compared to previously. Next is Necros, and while sure it's definitely a nice boost, it definitely isn't enough to push the deck forward without multiple copies of Unicorn, which is what the deck definitely needs. However, that said, it's still consistent and can certainly take down regionals against decks that don't reliably have answers. Then there's the decks that didn't get touched at all, which have come out as massive winners from the list. First being Pendulum, which has the exact same LP combo and can set up ridiculous boards, play through disruptions, and play going first or second. Then there's True Draco, which only lost a single terraforming, but has so much draw power and versatility in its Floodgate arsenal that it can answer to pretty much any given format, while not really being a defining deck itself. Finally, there's Guru, which suffers slightly more from losing away into Hidden City, but it's now one of, if not the best control deck of the format, with similar strengths to True Draco. There's also a lot of honorable mentions, and your favorite road deck can definitely have the ability to compete, given how wide open the format is. It all just depends on how you decide to deck build, and pilot your decks accordingly. As for the unlimited cards, there's not really too much to say here. I don't think they're super impactful on a competitive scale, apart from the 2 that I already mentioned previously, but they can definitely be utilized to a reasonable degree of success, and I am excited to see if any of these rejuvenated archetypes or singular cards can make a stand against the top forces of the format. So finally, the all-important preliminary tier list. Dun dun dun. I want to reiterate over and over again that this is extremely preliminary, and we've only had about 30 hours or so to really digest the changes. I can very much be totally wrong here, and we can look back and just laugh later, but for now I'm going to briefly go over my initial thoughts. I'll be breaking them down into categories as Tier 1, Tier 2, Rogue, and Sleeper decks, with Sleeper being the decks that could easily be Rogue or even Tier 2, just depending on how strong they actually shape up within the current format. So let's begin. For Tier 1, I have Thunder, Guard Dragon combos, those types of decks, which are all very innovative and have ridiculously high ceilings. We have Pendulum, which didn't get touched at all and will compete with Thunder and Guard Dragon decks as the premier combo deck of the format. Sky Striker, which despite the hit is extremely adaptable still. And True Draco, which will keep many of the other Tier 1 decks honest with its absurd Floodgate access. In Tier 2, we have Orchist, which does many of the same things, but was already the weaker of the big four of the previous format, and it is hard to imagine how the deck will be built moving forward. Then there's Subterror, which I feel can struggle with consistency getting to Guru all the time, but it is a deck that can play all sorts of non-engine cards. We also have Cyber Dragon, which is always on the horizon waiting to strike, either through OTK or with Almirage and the new Orchist combos. Next up, I have Paleozoic, which has flown under the radar for a lot of people I feel, and could also pop up as another control deck. Then finally for Tier 2, we have Dinosaur variants, which also are very aggressive and have gone unscathed through the ban list, and they could definitely make a splash in the current format. For Rogue decks, we have Nekroz, Salamangreat, Altergeist, and Trickstar. I already talked quite a lot about each of these decks as far as what I think their shortcomings are, but I think that they definitely can make a stand in the format depending on how it develops and how players prepare. Then finally, the Sleeper decks. There's a lot of them to consider, but I put Magical Muskets, Madolches, Infernoids, Crusadia OTK as a pure strategy, and Traptrix as some of the decks to watch. These are some of just my personal picks, but there are a lot more decks that can fit into this category, and it's very interesting to see how they're going to compete in the upcoming format. And that's going to do it for my analysis on the format. I know this is a really long video, but there's 31 changes to the ban list, so I really felt that adequately discussing the changes, while remaining relatively concise, would still take up a considerable amount of time. But regardless, thank you guys so much for watching, hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I'll catch you in the next one. See you guys!